1913, signed a treaty with the Dutch government called the Two-Row Wampum. And if you don't know what the Two-Row Wampum is, the Two-Row Wampum is that the non-Haudenosaunee people or the non-native people are supposed to govern themselves with their own rules, their own laws, their own traditions, their own customs, their own languages, and they were given a vote. And we, the Haudenosaunee people, were given a canoe with the same customs, the same laws, and we're supposed to be working in conjunction together. That means that the non-Haudenosaunee people are not supposed to be jumping into the canoe, and the people in the canoe are not supposed to be jumping into the boat, so we don't steer each other's vessels. We're supposed to be working in conjunction together. The governments that are here are not working for our best interest. They're not working for you. Harper, when he gets elected, isn't going to come to any of you and say thank you very much for that vote. He's going to continue on his agenda. Now, the two questions you got to ask yourself are this. When you're talking about democracy, how does that democracy look? That's the first question you have to ask yourself. What is this democracy that we're promoting? What does it look like? How is it included for all people? Because our Constitution was stated that it had to be done by consensus, not by one person, by consensus. So that laws through the Confederacy couldn't be passed. Even if the chief opposed it, and all the nations and all the families and all the chiefs got together, and he still said no. He would have to have a very strong reason to say no. And in the Constitution of the Iroquois Confederacy, it states that consensus of all people needs to be made in order for decisions to be made. So democracy means consensus of all people. It doesn't mean just one individual or one government standing and saying that it represents you. Democracy has to be promoted and practiced by all, not just by a chosen few. And there are a lot of issues that need to be dealt with here in the so-called country that you call Canada. This is not Canada. This is what they call the Mississauga Nation of the New Credit. But we at Six Nations hold the wampum for the Mississauga Nation. So when Chief Brian Laforme of the Mississauga sold Toronto, he had no right to do that. He had no right to sell our land for $140 million. The treaties here are null and void under terra nullius. And a lot of people ask me, what does that democracy look like if decolonization is to be practiced? Well, this is how it works. The referendums have to be held by the people, in the name of the people, for the people, in consideration of the people, not for the personal greedy or the corporations. So how that works is that we the people can have referendums here on the issues that matter to the people, for the people. So we can stop selling the land and resources, we can stop begging to a government who doesn't respect us, and we can start making decisions for ourselves in consensus. I urge all people to check out my website. It's www.decolonizenorthamerica.org. And I have cards here on me. I'm willing to talk to people what the decolonization process is. I don't want to stay up here too long, but I just want to finish off by saying this. The petition that I've been working on for the last year, since March 8th, has been trying to get through the United Nations decolonization of declaration from 1960, which states that any people of a specific territory or homeland have the right to decide the future status of their homeland, which is also known as decolonization. Indigenous people have the first and right foremost to decolonize over anyone else in the continent of Turtle Island. And this is how it works, is that we have to work together through the three treaties. The one treaty that I stated was the Two-Row Wampum. The second one, which I believe was stated in the 1700s, which is the Silver Chain Covenant. Another thing that was deemed between the Government of Canada and the Iroquois Confederacy. And the Dish with One Spoon Treaty, And if you don't know what the dish with one spoon treaty is, it states this, that all should have the right to go to the same lake and fish from the same waters, and nobody has to be greedy. We should all be sharing the land and the resources. But with Indigenous people, we are getting the low down on the resources. The government is making 90% of our land and our resources and leaving us in poverty. Look what happened in Attawapiskat. They are living in third world conditions while De Beers is making $683 billion. Attawapiskat will not see a cent of that money. And you talk about democracy. What about the democracy for our people, our customs and our religion and our traditions? So don't forget that when you're talking about democracy, you need to consider the other nations that are also involved, because the non-Haudenosaunee government has told you that we are not sovereign nations. We are sovereign nations. We have our own passports. We have our own constitution. We have our own government. That sounds like sovereignty to me. The Mississaugas have sovereignty. The Ojibwe, why are they called nations? The Mohawk Nation, the Ojibwe Nation, the Oneida Nation. What does it mean to be a nation? So when we talk about democracy, we have to be in consideration for everybody, not just for Native people or non-Native people, for all people. And you people need to start thinking about the children that are not yet walking on this earth. Why should they not be allowed to reap and benefit a world which we are working in, to be left, to be destroyed? This is the difference between our people and the non-Haudenosaunee people, is that we are thinking about future generations. We are thinking about our children and our children's children. And this is what we all need to be thinking about. We can't just be thinking about ourselves. It's time to stop being selfish. We either decolonize or we continue to be a slave. And anyone here who was not born a monarch is still a slave. I know that no one here was born a monarch. That's why you people are slaves to the tax system. Like I said, my petition, my website, I have very fantastic information, and I'm really glad I could come down here and share some of this information with you. The real true fact is that if we truly want change, we have to fight for it. We got to quit saying to each other, we want Harper out. We got to make sure he's out. We got to quit talking how we're going to evict all these politicians. We keep praising Egypt. We keep praising Libya. We keep praising Venezuela. Well, how come these people are liberating their own governments and we're still sitting here being oppressed? Thank you very much. Yahweh.
Devine is a great speaker, actually. Eh? Anyway, you guys think he's a great speaker. Anyway, I think he's a great speaker. I don't know. Honestly. So, for me, my biggest concern right now is basically the root of all legislation being passed right now by the Harper government. And if we go back to the root of all legislation being passed, you have to look and see that it is illegitimate. I love talking about the illegitimacy of the Harper government, because in our democracy, in our Western society, democracy is the greatest tenet of our Western society, okay? Even if it's an imperfect democracy. The fact is that during an election, in a democracy, it is supposed to be fair and free. But what happened last year during the campaign was that hundreds of thousands, in fact actually 6 million phone calls were put out by the Conservatives and their agents, certain companies, okay? Thousands of these phone calls were fraudulent. They targeted non-conservative voters and misled them as to where they could vote. They suppressed the ability to vote knowledgeably, which therefore negates the results of the election. We need a new election that is free from interference, free from fraud. Now, if we go beyond that, we can see that the Omnibus Bill C-38 is illegitimate. It was passed by a government that was not elected legitimately, okay? We have experienced a soft coup d'etat, okay? And this is essentially what has happened, okay? We've experienced a soft coup d'etat in Canada by corporatistic forces, if you know what I mean. So, what I want to say is that we cannot allow them, in addition to passing laws that harm our environment, our well-being, and just overall Canadians' well-being in general, we cannot allow them to also send us to war, okay? The entire premise of going to war is illegitimate, actually, without fighting tooth and nail for a diplomatic peace process, but they shut down the embassy in Iran because they're gunning for war. The reason they're gunning for war, no pun intended, is because the conservatives, as individuals, will benefit financially if they go to war with Iran. There's a direct financial link between the conservatives and the military and oil industrial complex should they go to war in Iran. Now, I've done some research on this, obviously. Iran has 150 billion barrels of oil. 150 billion barrels of oil. Do you guys understand how huge that is? 150 billion barrels of oil, okay? If there is a war with Iran, the price of a barrel of oil, due to supply disruptions, will go up to $300 and even between $200 and $300. Now, assuming that the price of a barrel of oil, if there's a war with Iran and the Strait of Hormuz, which carries 20 to 30% of the daily oil supply, is blocked, if the Strait of Hormuz is blocked, let's just say that the price of oil goes up to about $160, just to be conservative, okay? As opposed to like $200 or $300. At 150 billion barrels times $160, you're looking at $2.4 trillion in revenue, okay, for oil companies, which are not in Iran right now because it is nationalized. $2.4 trillion in revenue. Now imagine if it goes up to $320. You're looking at $4.8 trillion in revenue for the oil companies. That is fucking huge, okay? No wonder they want to go to war. The reason that the conservatives will financially benefit is because the conservatives are the political wing of the oil industry. Okay? They are the political wing of the oil industry. The fact is, the conservatives allowed our war policy in Afghanistan to be written by the oil industry. Do you guys not get this? Okay? The 2007 panel on Canada's future role in Afghanistan, in 2007, the panel that created our policy for war in Afghanistan, ostensibly for democracy, was actually written by oil companies in which they granted themselves the authority to build a natural gas pipeline from Central Asia through southern Afghanistan to the south of Pakistan. Okay? 60% of the panel on Canada's future role in Afghanistan consisted of oil industry insiders. 60% of the panel, more than half of the panel. They wrote our war policy, okay? Now these people who wrote it are also conservative members, party members. The Prime Minister himself is an oil industry insider. He even grew up in the oil industry. His father was an accountant for Imperial Oil, okay? The Conservative Party is the political wing of the oil industry. Now do you see why they're pulling out our diplomatic mission in Iran? They're pulling out our diplomatic mission in Iran.
Expelling diplomats here.
so that they can eliminate any potential for a diplomatic process to be achieved. They do not want a diplomatic process to be achieved unless Iran opens up its markets to the oil industry, like Myanmar, okay? Now look, in addition to this, the private central bankers, the central bankers that issue our currency, that control the money supply to government, will also make lots of money, okay, from the debt that they will issue to governments to fund the war on behalf of the oil industry. It is a cabal of corporations that control the global macroeconomic system, okay? They are a plutocracy of leaders that serve the welfare of just the 0.01% of the wealthiest people on the planet, okay? The fact that they are undemocratic, the fact that they violate human rights, common norms of democracy, the fact that they violate human rights is all indication, along with their imperialistic pursuits, of the fact that they are, with no less of a word, fascist. We have experienced a soft coup d'etat in Canada by a corporatistic element that has undermined our democracy by stealing the last election in order to propagate a war with Iran, because the government that stole the election is the political wing of the oil industry. We must not allow this to happen. People should not accept these policies, these laws as legitimate, because the fact that the government that is passing these laws did not legitimately win the election negates the possibility of those laws to be considered legitimate. You cannot accept it. The Harper government is not legitimate, and so therefore you should never refer to it as the Harper government. You should refer to it as the Harper regime.
That's right.
Okay?
It's a regime.
All right? They are undemocratic. They are a regime because they won. They gained their power through undemocratic means. On the surface it is democratic, but it was not democratic because they suppressed the free ability of people to vote. So the Harper regime controls Canada, not the government. The government is a regime. Okay. Now, there are many things that we could do to try to improve this. All right? In order to maintain the legitimacy of our own cause, we must remain democratically. Otherwise, we are no better than them because we're still enforcing ourselves. Now, if in the future we are ever successful at peacefully bringing about a socially just revolution in the governmental sector, okay, that brings about the proper administration of society, a more fair administration of society, there are certain things that we could do, that we could implement, practices that we could implement. And this includes a referendi-based system. Referendi are basically a voting, it's basically a referendum-based system in which all people have a say, a consensus-oriented say in what will proceed. It's more democratic.